Sarah Martinez had always been the girl who blended into the background. At 23, she possessed a quiet strength that most people mistook for weakness, and a sharp mind that others overlooked because she rarely spoke up in meetings. When she first walked through the gates of Naval Base Coronado, her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The morning fog clung to the California coastline, and the salty air carried with it the sound of boots hitting pavement in perfect rhythm. She clutched her assignment papers tightly in her sweaty palm. Administrative assistant to SEAL Team 7. The word still felt surreal, even after weeks of processing paperwork and background checks. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Ohio where the most excitement came from Friday night football games and the annual county fair. Her father had been a mechanic, her mother a school secretary. Military life was as foreign to her as speaking ancient Greek, yet here she was, about to step into a world she had only seen in movies. The personnel office smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaning solution. Behind a metal desk sat Chief Petty Officer Williams, a woman whose stern expression could probably stop a charging bull in its tracks. Her gray hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin, and her uniform was pressed with mathematical precision. Martinez, Sarah Elena, Chief Williams read from the file without looking up. College graduate, business administration, no prior military experience. Says here you apply for this position specifically. Sarah cleared her throat softly. Yes, ma'am. I wanted to serve my country, and when I saw the opening for administrative support, I thought my organizational skills might be useful. Chief Williams finally looked up, her eyes scanning Sarah from head to toe with the efficiency of a security scanner. You understand this isn't some corporate office job, right? SEAL Team 7 is an elite unit. These men have been through hell and back more times than you've probably had hot dinners. They don't have time for hand-holding or training someone who might crack under pressure. The word stung, but Sarah kept her expression neutral. She had heard variations of this speech her entire life. Too quiet, too soft, too fragile for the real world. But beneath her calm exterior burned a determination that had carried her through college on scholarships while working 2 part-time jobs, had helped her care for her aging grandmother while her parents worked overtime to pay medical bills, and had driven her to apply for this position despite having no military connections whatsoever. I understand, ma'am. I'm here to do whatever job needs to be done. Chief Williams studied her for another long moment, then sighed. All right, Martinez. Your supervisor will be Lieutenant Commander Jackson Hayes. He's been with Team 7 for 8 years, and he runs a tight ship. You'll be handling personnel files, mission logistics, equipment inventories, and whatever else needs organizing. The work is classified, demanding, and often thankless. You'll be working with men who have seen combat in some of the world's most dangerous places. Some of them might not initially welcome a civilian in their midst. Sarah nodded, absorbing every word. She had researched SEAL teams extensively before applying, reading everything from official Navy publications to memoirs written by former operators. She knew about the grueling training, the brotherhood forged in adversity, and the life-or-death missions that required absolute trust between team members. She also knew that as a civilian support staff member, she would be perpetually on the outside looking in. Your workspace is in Building C, 2nd floor. You'll share an office area with 2 other administrative personnel who handle logistics for multiple teams. Report to Lieutenant Commander Hayes at 0800 tomorrow morning for your initial briefing. The rest of the day blurred together in a series of badge photos, security briefings, and paperwork that seemed to multiply like rabbits. Sarah found herself a small apartment off base, furnished with the kind of generic furniture that suggested its previous occupants had been as transient as Navy personnel typically were. That evening, she sat on her new couch eating takeout Chinese food and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. How's the new job, honey? Dad says to remember you're representing the whole family now. Sarah smiled despite her nerves. Her parents still didn't quite understand why she had chosen this path. They had expected her to find a nice office job in Columbus, maybe meet a local boy, and settle down within driving distance. Instead, she had chosen to cross the country to work with elite soldiers in a world that seemed designed to test her limits. The next morning arrived gray and drizzle, typical for the coast in early spring. Sarah dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, a navy blue blazer and slacks that she hoped struck the right balance between competent and unassuming. She arrived at Building C 30 minutes early, partly from nerves and partly because she had always believed in the importance of punctuality. The building buzzed with activity even at 7:30 in the morning. Personnel in various uniforms moved with purposeful strides through hallways lined with motivational posters and official photographs of naval operations. Sarah found her office on the second floor, a cramped space divided into 3 workstations by shoulder-high partitions. 2 of the desks were already occupied. "You must be the new admin for Team 7, said a cheerful voice from the corner workstation. The speaker was a woman about Sarah's age with short blonde hair and kind eyes. "I'm Jenny Morrison, Logistics Coordinator for Teams 3 and 5. And that's Marcus Thompson over there, he handles equipment and supplies for Team 9. Marcus looked up from his computer screen and gave a brief nod. He was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe early 20s, with the kind of serious demeanor that suggested he took his responsibilities very seriously. "Welcome to the madhouse," he said with a slight smile. "Fair warning, things get pretty intense around here, especially when the teams are preparing for deployment." Jenny rolled her chair over to Sarah's workstation, which consisted of a metal desk, a computer that looked like it had seen better decades, and a filing cabinet that had been painted so many times the drawers stuck slightly when opened. "The guys from Team 7 are good people," Jenny said quietly. "Intense, dedicated, but fair. Lieutenant Commander Hayes is demanding but reasonable. Just remember, everything we handle here is classified at various levels, so discretion isn't just important, it's legally mandated." At exactly 8 o'clock, the office door opened and a man entered who immediately commanded attention without saying a word. Lieutenant Commander Jackson Hayes was not particularly tall, maybe 5 feet 10 inches, but he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from years of making life or death decisions. His hair was dark with gray threads at the temples, and his eyes held the alert, assessing quality of someone accustomed to evaluating threats and opportunities in split seconds. "Martinez," he said, and it wasn't a question. His voice was calm, measured, with just a hint of a southern accent. "I'm Hayes. Ready for your briefing?" Sarah stood up immediately, smoothing her blazer nervously. "Yes, sir." He gestured for her to follow him, and they walked down the hallway to a small conference room. The walls were covered with maps, organizational charts, and whiteboards covered in acronyms and abbreviations that meant nothing to Sarah. Hayes closed the door and indicated a chair across from where he sat down. "I'm going to be direct with you, Martinez, because that's the only way this works. SEAL Team 7 is not like other military units you might have read about or seen in movies. We operate in environments where a single mistake can cost lives, not just our own but, potentially hundreds or thousands of innocent people. The administrative work you'll be doing might seem routine, but it directly impacts our operational readiness and mission success." He opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. "You'll be responsible for maintaining personnel records, tracking training certifications, coordinating travel arrangements for operations I can't tell you about, managing equipment inventories worth millions of dollars, and handling communications that are classified at levels requiring security clearances you'll need to earn. The learning curve is steep, the hours are long, and the pressure is constant." Sarah studied the documents, trying to process the complexity of what she was seeing. Charts showing deployment rotations, equipment maintenance schedules, training requirements that seemed to go on for pages, and forms with classification markings she had only read about in her security briefing. "I understand this is overwhelming," Hayes continued, his tone softening slightly. "But I requested a civilian for this position specifically because I needed someone without preconceived notions about how things should be done. Military personnel often get locked into thinking that follows regulations to the letter. Sometimes we need creative solutions to complex problems." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same intensity she had felt from Chief Williams the day before. "I've read your file, Martinez. Top 10% of your graduating class, 3 years of experience managing complex projects at your previous job, letters of recommendation that describe you as detail-oriented and reliable under pressure. On paper, you're exactly what we need. But paper doesn't tell me how you'll handle your first time processing casualty reports, or how you'll react when you're working late and hear the helicopters coming back from a mission and have to wonder if everyone made it home." The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She had known intellectually that her work would support dangerous operations, but hearing it stated so directly made it real in a way that reading job descriptions never could. These weren't abstract military operations happening in distant countries, they were missions involving real people whose lives might depend on her ability to keep track of their equipment, their schedules, and their readiness status. "Sir," she said carefully, "I can't promise I'll never be affected by the reality of what happens here. But I can promise that I'll never let personal feelings interfere with doing my job correctly. I didn't apply for this position because I thought it would be easy or because I had romantic notions about military life. I applied because I wanted to contribute to something important, and I was willing to work as hard as necessary to earn the right to be here. Hayes nodded slowly. Good answer. Now let me introduce you to some of the team members you'll be working with most directly. They left the conference room and walked across the base to another building, this one newer and more heavily secured. Hayes badged them through several checkpoints, each one requiring Sarah to show her temporary credentials to guards who examined them with careful attention. The final checkpoint led to a large open area filled with equipment that Sarah couldn't begin to identify, workbenches covered with technical manuals, and several men engaged in what appeared to be maintenance work on sophisticated electronic devices. Gentlemen, Hayes called out, and the activity paused as heads turned in their direction. I want you to meet Sarah Martinez, our new administrative coordinator. Martinez, these are some of the operators from Team 7. The introductions blurred together in a series of names, ranks, and firm handshakes. Petty Officer First Class Mike Rodriguez, a compact man with intelligent eyes and calloused hands. Chief Petty Officer David Chen, whose quiet demeanor reminded Sarah of her favorite high school teacher. Petty Officer Second Class Tyler Johnson, young and enthusiastic, with a grin that suggested he found genuine joy in whatever he was doing. Senior Chief Petty Officer Robert Stone, obviously a veteran with graying hair and scars on his forearms that spoke of experiences Sarah couldn't imagine. Each man was polite, professional, and clearly curious about the civilian who would be handling their administrative needs. Sarah sensed a natural wariness, not unfriendly but cautious, the way people who depended on each other for survival might naturally react to an unknown element in their carefully balanced system. Martinez will be taking over the admin functions that have been handled by different people on a temporary basis, Hayes explained. She'll be your point of contact for travel arrangements, equipment requests, training documentation, and anything else that requires coordination with higher headquarters or other agencies. Senior Chief Stone stepped forward, extending his hand to Sarah. Welcome aboard, Ms. Martinez. We appreciate having dedicated admin support. Makes our lives considerably easier when we don't have to worry about whether our gear will be waiting for us at the destination. The comment was clearly meant to be welcoming, but Sarah caught an undertone that suggested previous experiences with administrative failures that had real consequences. She made a mental note to ask Hayes later about what kinds of problems had occurred in the past that made reliable administrative support such a priority. The rest of the morning was spent touring facilities, meeting additional personnel, and beginning to understand the scope of her responsibilities. By lunchtime, Sarah's head was spinning with new information, acronyms, procedures, and the names and faces of dozens of people she would need to work with regularly. She ate alone in the base cafeteria, reviewing the notes she had taken and trying to prioritize the mountain of tasks that had been assigned to her. When she returned to her office, she found a stack of files on her desk with a note from Hayes. Start with these. Personnel records need updating, and 3 team members have training certifications expiring next month. Figure out how to get them recertified without interfering with the current operation tempo. Sarah opened the first file and began reading, quickly realizing that even the seemingly straightforward task of updating personnel records involved navigating complex military regulations, interagency coordination, and security requirements that were completely foreign to her civilian experience. Each file told a story of dedication and sacrifice that humbled her, men who had volunteered for service that took them away from families for months at a time, placed them in harm's way regularly, and demanded physical and mental standards that few people could meet. As the afternoon wore on, she found herself developing a deep respect for the men whose careers she was now helping to manage. These weren't action movie heroes, they were real people with wives, children, parents, and personal struggles, who had chosen to dedicate their lives to protecting others. The weight of responsibility for ensuring their administrative needs were handled correctly felt heavier than any job she had ever undertaken. The day ended with Sarah staying late, long after Jenny and Marcus had left for the day, working by the light of her desk lamp to familiarize herself with filing systems, computer databases, and procedures that would become her daily routine. When she finally locked the office and walked across the darkened base to her car, she felt simultaneously overwhelmed and determined. This was unlike anything she had ever attempted, but, for the first time in her life, she felt like she was part of something truly important. 3 weeks into her new position, Sarah had settled into a routine that started before dawn and ended well after sunset. She discovered that supporting an elite military unit meant that emergencies didn't follow normal business hours, and critical paperwork had a way of materializing at the most inconvenient times. Her small apartment had become a second office, with military manuals stacked on her coffee table and her laptop permanently plugged in on the kitchen counter. The learning curve had been steeper than climbing Mount Everest in heels, but Sarah was determined to prove that Hayes had made the right choice in hiring a civilian. She had memorized regulation numbers, mastered the arcane art of military abbreviations, and developed a filing system that would have impressed a NASA engineer. More importantly, she had begun to understand the rhythm and culture of SEAL Team 7. Every morning, she arrived at the office by 6:30 to prepare for the day's activities. The team members typically began their physical training at dawn, and Sarah had learned to time her arrival so she could have reports and schedules ready when they finished their workout. She had also discovered that SEALs consumed coffee in quantities that defied medical science, so she had taken to starting the coffee maker as soon as she unlocked the office door. On this particular Tuesday morning, Sarah was deep in concentration, trying to resolve a complex scheduling conflict involving overlapping training requirements, when she heard voices outside her office. The tone was different from the usual professional discussions she had grown accustomed to, carrying an edge of tension that made her look up from her computer screen. "Told you, Rodriguez, the new admin doesn't need to know operational details," someone was saying in a voice she recognized as belonging to Petty Officer Johnson. "She handles paperwork, not mission planning. And I'm saying we need to keep her in the loop about personnel status if she's going to coordinate our schedules effectively," came Rodriguez's reply, his voice patient but firm. "How's she supposed to arrange training if she doesn't know who's available when? She's civilian, Mike. There are protocols about information sharing." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She had been wondering why certain requests she made seemed to be met with vague responses or delays, and, apparently, she had been working with incomplete information because of concerns about her civilian status. It was frustrating to discover that her ability to do her job effectively was being hindered by well-intentioned but, ultimately counterproductive security measures. She heard Senior Chief Stone's voice joining the conversation. "The lieutenant commander cleared her for the information she needs. If Hayes says she needs to know something to do her job, that's good enough for me." "Easy for you to say, Senior Chief. You don't have to explain to higher-ups why we're sharing operational details with someone who wasn't even in the military 6 months ago." The voices moved away down the hallway, but the conversation continued to bother Sarah for the rest of the morning. She had sensed some of this reluctance before, subtle signs that certain information was being filtered before it reached her, but hearing it discussed openly made her feel like an outsider in a way that her 3 weeks of dedicated work hadn't prepared her for. During lunch, she decided to address the issue directly with Hayes. She found him in his office, reviewing what appeared to be mission reports, his desk covered with photographs and maps that he quickly covered when she knocked on his doorframe. "Martinez. Come in. Close the door behind you." Sarah sat down in the chair across from his desk, trying to organize her thoughts. "Sir, I wanted to discuss an issue that's affecting my ability to do my job effectively." Hayes leaned back in his chair, giving her his full attention. "Go on." "Some of the team members seem uncertain about how much information they should share with me regarding personnel availability and training schedules. I understand there are security concerns about my civilian status, but without accurate information about who's available when, I can't coordinate training and logistics effectively." Hayes was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You're right. There's been some confusion about your clearance level and what information you need access to. Let me clarify something for you and for the team. You have been granted a secret clearance, which is appropriate for the work you're doing. More importantly, I determine what information you need to perform your duties, not individual team members." He pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "I'll send out a memo this afternoon clarifying your role and the information sharing protocols. But I want to ask you something directly. How are you handling the adjustment to military culture? This isn't the corporate world, and I know some of the informal aspects of military life can be challenging for civilians to navigate." Sarah appreciated his directness. "It's definitely an adjustment, sir. I'm learning that there are layers of protocol and tradition that aren't written down anywhere but are very important to how things actually work. I'm trying to observe and adapt rather than assuming I understand how things should be done." "Good approach. Let me give you some insight into what you're dealing with. These men have worked together in life or death situations. Their survival and mission success depend on absolute trust in each other's competence and reliability. When someone new joins the team, even in a support role, there's a natural period of testing and evaluation that happens. It's not personal, it's professional survival instinct. Hayes set down his pen and looked directly at her. You've been doing excellent work, Martinez. Your filing system is the most organized we've ever had. You've solved several logistical problems that had been causing headaches for months, and you consistently deliver what you promise when you promise it. The team members are starting to recognize that, but military culture changes slowly. Sarah felt a warm glow of pride at his words, but also a determination to prove herself even more thoroughly. Thank you, sir. I want to earn their trust, not just have it assigned to me because of my position. That's exactly the right attitude. Which brings me to something else I want to discuss with you. The team is going to be conducting a training exercise next month that will require complex coordination with multiple agencies and extensive travel arrangements. I'm considering giving you the lead on logistics coordination. It would be a significant responsibility and a good opportunity to demonstrate your capabilities to people who haven't worked with you directly yet. The prospect was both exciting and terrifying. What would that involve, sir? Coordinating transportation for personnel and equipment across multiple time zones, arranging accommodations that meet security requirements, ensuring all personnel have current certifications and documentation, managing a budget that runs into six figures, and serving as the primary point of contact between our team and various civilian agencies and military units we'll be working with. Sarah's mind immediately began racing through the logistics challenges such an assignment would involve. How much advance notice would I have, and what kind of support would be available if problems arise during execution? Hayes smiled, and she realized he had been evaluating her response to his proposal. Good questions. You'd have 6 weeks to plan, and you'd be working directly with me and Senior Chief Stone on problem resolution. But, understand, this isn't the kind of assignment where you can hand problems up the chain of command. You'd be expected to find solutions independently and keep everything running smoothly regardless of what unexpected issues arise. I'd like to take on that responsibility, sir. I thought you would. I'll have Senior Chief Stone brief you on the scope and requirements this afternoon. Consider this your opportunity to prove that civilian innovation can enhance military efficiency. After leaving Hayes' office, Sarah spent the rest of the day thinking about the upcoming assignment and what it would mean for her position within the team. She realized that success would likely establish her credibility permanently, while failure could undermine months of careful relationship building. The pressure was intense, but it was exactly the kind of challenge that had motivated her to seek this position in the first place. That afternoon, Senior Chief Stone knocked on her office door and settled his considerable bulk into the chair next to her desk. Stone was one of the team members who had been consistently professional but maintained a certain reserve around her, and Sarah sensed that this briefing would be an important test of their working relationship. Lieutenant Commander says you're taking point on logistics for next month's exercise, Stone said without preamble. Before we get into details, I want to understand how you approach complex planning. Sarah appreciated his direct approach. I start by identifying all the moving parts and dependencies, then work backwards from the end state to determine critical path timelines. I believe in building redundancy into plans and having contingencies for the most likely failure points. Stone nodded approvingly. Good. Because this exercise involves moving 12 personnel and approximately 2 tons of specialized equipment to 3 different locations over a 10-day period, with timing that's critical to the training objectives. We'll be working with Army Rangers, Air Force Special Operations, and Navy EOD units, each with their own procedures and requirements. He pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents across her desk. Here's what we're looking at. Primary location is a training facility in Nevada, secondary location is a Coast Guard station in California, and final location is a joint training center in Colorado. Personnel need to move in specific groups at specific times, equipment needs to arrive before personnel at each location, and we have a zero-tolerance policy for delays because other units are coordinating their schedules around our timeline. Sarah studied the documents, quickly realizing that this was several orders of magnitude more complex than anything she had handled previously. The travel arrangements alone would require coordinating with multiple transportation agencies, and the equipment shipping would involve hazardous materials protocols she had never encountered. Senior Chief, what's been the historical failure rate for this kind of coordination? Stone's expression was unreadable. High enough that we usually assign 2 experienced personnel to handle logistics for exercises of this scope. You're being given the opportunity to handle it solo because the lieutenant commander believes you can bring fresh perspectives to old problems. The implication was clear: this was either an opportunity to prove herself or an invitation to fail spectacularly. Sarah felt her competitive nature rising to meet the challenge. What kind of support can I expect if I run into problems I can't solve independently? Depends on the problem. Equipment issues, you work directly with me. Personnel problems, you coordinate with the lieutenant commander. Interagency coordination problems, you figure it out yourself or find someone who can help you figure it out. We can't hold your hand through every decision, but we're not going to hang you out to dry if you need backup. Over the next 2 hours, Stone walked her through the detailed requirements, timeline constraints, and potential problem areas. By the time he left her office, Sarah's desk was covered with notes, timelines, contact lists, and regulation references. She also had a profound appreciation for the complexity of military logistics and a new understanding of why administrative support was considered critical to operational success. That evening, Sarah stayed late to begin organizing her approach to the project. She created spreadsheets to track personnel movements, equipment shipments, and timeline dependencies. She researched regulations governing the transportation of military equipment and began compiling contact information for the various agencies she would need to coordinate with. As the hours passed, she found herself becoming absorbed in the intellectual challenge of the planning process. Around 9 o'clock, she heard footsteps in the hallway and looked up to see Rodriguez appearing in her doorway. "Still here, Martinez?" That's dedication above and beyond. Sarah stretched, realizing she had been hunched over her computer for hours. "Just trying to get a head start on planning for next month's exercise. Senior Chief Stone briefed me this afternoon, and I want to make sure I understand all the moving parts before I start making commitments to other agencies." Rodriguez entered her office and glanced at the documents spread across her desk. "Mind if I ask what your initial assessment is?" Stone doesn't usually trust complex logistics to anyone without extensive experience. Sarah hesitated, unsure how much detail she should share, then decided that Rodriguez's question probably indicated he was one of the personnel whose movements she would be coordinating. "It's definitely complex, but it seems manageable if I can maintain visibility on all the dependencies and build enough slack into the timeline to accommodate the inevitable delays and changes. What do you see as the biggest risk factors?" The question suggested Rodriguez had experience with similar operations and was testing her understanding of the challenges involved. Equipment shipments arriving late or to the wrong location, personnel getting delayed by weather or transportation problems, and coordination failures between agencies that have different procedures and priorities. Also, changes to requirements or timeline after I've already made commitments to various vendors and agencies. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "Those are the obvious ones. What about the less obvious risks?" Sarah thought for a moment. Personnel getting sick or injured before departure, equipment failures that require last-minute substitutions, security requirements that change based on threat assessments I won't be informed about, and coordination with civilian agencies that don't understand military timeline requirements. Better. You're thinking like someone who's planned operations before, not like someone who just handles paperwork. That's encouraging. The comment was clearly meant as a compliment, but Sarah detected an undertone that suggested Rodriguez had been concerned about her ability to handle operational-level planning. "I appreciate the feedback. This is definitely more complex than anything I've handled before, but I'm confident I can manage it if I approach it systematically. Just remember, Martinez, when we're out there conducting the exercise, we're depending on your planning to ensure everything we need is where it's supposed to be when it's supposed to be there. There's no Amazon Prime delivery for specialized equipment in the middle of the Nevada desert." After Rodriguez left, Sarah continued working until nearly 11 o'clock, when exhaustion finally forced her to pack up her materials and drive home. As she lay in bed that night, she found herself thinking about Rodriguez's final comment and the weight of responsibility it represented. For the first time since starting her position, she truly understood that her work wasn't just administrative support, it was operational support that directly impacted the team's ability to accomplish their mission. The realization was both humbling and motivating. She had wanted to contribute to something important, and now she had the opportunity to prove that a civilian could enhance military operations through careful planning and attention to detail. Success would establish her as a valued team member, failure would confirm the doubts that some team members still harbored about her qualifications. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah was already planning her approach to the next day's work, determined to prove that she deserved the trust Hayes and Stone were placing in her abilities. The morning of the exercise departure dawned gray and windy, with a marine layer that seemed determined to complicate everything Sarah had spent 6 weeks planning. She arrived at the base at 4:30 in the morning, 2 hours before the scheduled departure time, her stomach tight with anxiety and her mind running through the endless checklists she had memorized over the previous weeks. Her meticulous planning had paid off in ways that even she hadn't expected. Every piece of equipment was exactly where it needed to be, every transportation arrangement had been confirmed and reconfirmed, and every team member had the correct documentation for their movements. She had built contingencies into every aspect of the plan, anticipated potential problems, and developed relationships with key personnel at every organization she needed to coordinate with. But, despite her preparation, Sarah knew that the true test would come over the next 10 days as the team moved through their complex training schedule across 3 states. All her planning would be meaningless if she couldn't execute effectively when problems arose, and military operations always involved problems that no amount of planning could anticipate. The equipment loading proceeded with military precision, each item checked off against manifests that Sarah had prepared and cross-referenced multiple times. She watched as team members efficiently loaded specialized gear that represented millions of dollars in sophisticated technology, each piece critical to their training objectives and each piece her responsibility to ensure arrived safely at its destination. Hayes approached her as she supervised the final equipment checks, his expression serious but not disapproving. "How are you feeling about today, Martinez?" "Ready, sir. All preparations are complete, and contingency plans are in place for the most likely problem scenarios." "Good. I want you to understand something about the next 10 days. This exercise isn't just training for the team members, it's also an evaluation of your capabilities under operational pressures. You'll be dealing with problems in real time, coordinating with people you've never met before, and making decisions that affect mission success with incomplete information and tight deadlines." Sarah nodded, appreciating his directness while feeling the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders like a heavy pack. "I understand, sir. I hope you do. Because starting today, you're not just the administrative assistant anymore. You're the logistics coordinator for this operation, and everyone's success depends on your ability to keep all the moving parts synchronized." The first leg of the journey to Nevada proceeded flawlessly, with personnel and equipment arriving exactly on schedule. Sarah had traveled ahead of the main group to coordinate with the facility staff and ensure that accommodation and workspace arrangements met the team's requirements. She spent the afternoon verifying equipment deliveries, confirming training schedules, and establishing communications protocols that would allow her to maintain coordination between multiple locations. That evening, as the team settled into their temporary quarters and began preparing for the next day's training activities, Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction at how smoothly everything had progressed. Her months of studying military procedures, building relationships with logistics personnel, and developing systematic approaches to complex planning had resulted in exactly the kind of seamless execution that military operations required. Her satisfaction was short-lived. At 11:30 that night, her phone rang with news that threatened to unravel weeks of careful planning. "Martinez, this is Captain Williams at Travis Air Force Base. We have a problem with your equipment shipment scheduled for transport to California tomorrow morning." Sarah was instantly awake, reaching for the notebook where she kept emergency contact information and contingency plans. "What kind of problem, Captain?" "Aircraft maintenance issue. The C-130 that was supposed to carry your gear is grounded for at least 48 hours. We can't get your equipment to the Coast Guard station on schedule unless you can find alternative transportation." Sarah felt her heart sink as she calculated the implications. The California portion of the exercise was scheduled to begin in 2 days, and the equipment needed to arrive a full day ahead of personnel to allow time for setup and testing. Alternative transportation would mean either commercial shipping, which might not accommodate the specialized equipment and security requirements, or arranging for different military transport, which would require coordination with agencies she had never worked with before. "Captain, what are my options for alternative transport?" "You could try to get space on a Navy flight out of North Island, but that would require approval from their operations center and space available status. Or you could arrange ground transport, but that's a 14-hour drive and you'd need military drivers with security clearances for the specialized equipment." Sarah was already reaching for her laptop, pulling up the contact lists and transportation alternatives she had researched but hoped never to use. "How much time do I have to arrange alternative transport?" "If you want to maintain your timeline, you need to have a solution in place by 0600 tomorrow morning. That gives you about 6 hours. After hanging up, Sarah spent a few minutes organizing her thoughts and priorities. This was exactly the kind of crisis that Hayes had warned her about, a problem that couldn't be solved by following standard procedures or passing responsibility up the chain of command. She needed to find a solution quickly, implement it effectively, and ensure that the mission timeline remained intact. She started by calling the operations center at North Island Naval Air Station, hoping to secure space on a Navy flight. The conversation was frustrating, involving multiple transfers between personnel who didn't understand her requirements and several dead ends as she tried to navigate unfamiliar military transportation protocols. After an hour of phone calls, she had learned that Navy flights to the California location were fully booked for the next 3 days, with no possibility of accommodating additional cargo. Ground transportation was looking like her only option, but arranging military drivers and vehicles on such short notice would require approval from several different commands. At 1:30 in the morning, Sarah made a decision that went against every instinct she had developed about military protocol. She called Hayes directly, knowing that waking a commanding officer in the middle of the night was serious breach of normal procedure, but also knowing that mission success might depend on his ability to cut through bureaucratic obstacles she couldn't navigate alone. Hayes. His voice was alert despite the hour, confirming Sarah's suspicion that military officers never really stop thinking about their responsibilities. "Sir, this is Martinez. I have a problem with equipment transport to California that I can't solve through normal channels." She quickly explained the situation and the options she had researched. Hayes listened without interruption, then was quiet for a moment that seemed to last forever. "What's your recommendation, Martinez?" The question surprised her. She had expected him to either take over the problem or direct her to a specific solution. Instead, he was asking for her assessment and judgment, treating her like a trusted advisor rather than a subordinate who needed instruction. "Sir, I think ground transport is our best option. It's the most reliable way to ensure the equipment arrives on schedule, and I can arrange security and drivers through channels I've already established. The main risk is driver fatigue over a 14-hour trip, but I can arrange relay drivers at the halfway point." "Do it. You have my authorization to make whatever arrangements are necessary to get that equipment to California on time. Call me back when you have a confirmed solution." Over the next 4 hours, Sarah orchestrated a complex transportation operation that involved coordinating with 3 different military bases, arranging for specialized vehicles capable of handling the equipment, securing drivers with appropriate security clearances, and establishing communication protocols that would allow her to track the shipment's progress in real time. By 6 in the morning, she had secured a convoy of 2 military vehicles with relay drivers positioned at the halfway point, confirmed security protocols for the specialized equipment, and established check-in procedures that would give her visibility on the shipment's status throughout the journey. The equipment would arrive in California with 6 hours to spare before the personnel deployment. When she called Hayes to report the solution, she detected a note of approval in his voice that was more satisfying than any formal recognition could have been. "Well done, Martinez. You just solved a problem that would have required significant command intervention through traditional channels. The team launches for California in 4 hours, and they'll arrive to find their equipment ready and waiting." The California phase of the exercise proceeded without major incidents, but Sarah found herself dealing with a constant stream of minor problems that required creative solutions. Accommodation arrangements that didn't meet security requirements, training schedules that conflicted with facility availability, equipment that needed specialized transportation between training sites, and coordination with Coast Guard personnel who had different procedures and priorities than Navy operations. Each problem was small in isolation, but the cumulative effect was a constant pressure that required her to think quickly, adapt to changing circumstances, and make decisions with incomplete information. Sarah discovered that military logistics involved as much improvisation as planning, and that successful coordination required building relationships with people she might never meet face to face. On the 4th day of the exercise, while coordinating the movement from California to Colorado, Sarah received a call that would test every skill she had developed over the previous months. "Ms. Martinez, this is Colonel Anderson from Peterson Air Force Base. We have a security issue that's going to affect your team's arrival in Colorado." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that accompanied unexpected problems. "What kind of security issue, Colonel?" "Elevated threat assessment for the training facility where your team was scheduled to conduct their final exercise phase. We need to relocate the training to an alternate facility, which means different transportation requirements, different accommodation arrangements, and a 48-hour delay while we coordinate security protocols." Sarah's mind immediately began racing through the implications. A 48-hour delay would conflict with other training schedules that had been coordinated months in advance. The alternate facility would have different equipment requirements, different security protocols, and different coordination procedures. Most importantly, the team had other commitments immediately following this exercise that couldn't be delayed. Colonel, what are the parameters for the alternate facility, and how much flexibility do we have on timing? The alternate facility can accommodate your training requirements, but it's located in a different state, which means interstate transportation of your specialized equipment and coordination with a different set of civilian and military agencies. As for timing, the security assessment won't be complete for 48 hours minimum. Sarah realized that this problem was beyond anything she had encountered before. It involved not just logistics coordination, but operational security decisions that were above her pay grade and classification level. She needed guidance, but she also needed to present Hayes with solutions rather than just problems. Colonel, I need to coordinate with my commanding officer and get back to you with our response. Can you give me 2 hours to assess our options and develop a recommendation? 2 hours, Ms. Martinez. After that, I'll need a decision so we can begin implementing security protocols. Sarah immediately called Hayes and requested an emergency planning session. 20 minutes later, she found herself in a secure conference room with Hayes, Stone, and Rodriguez, explaining the situation and presenting the options she had researched during her frantic phone calls. Sir, we have 3 possible courses of action, she began, consulting the notes she had taken while coordinating with multiple agencies. We can accept the 48-hour delay and relocate to the alternate facility, which maintains training objectives but conflicts with post-exercise commitments. We can cancel the Colorado phase entirely and extend the California training, which eliminates the security issue but doesn't meet all training objectives. Or we can relocate to a completely different facility that I've identified in Arizona, which would require extensive recoordination but could maintain our timeline. Hayes studied the options she had presented, asking detailed questions about transportation requirements, facility capabilities, and coordination timelines. Sarah found herself defending her research and recommendations with confidence that surprised her, drawing on knowledge and relationships she had developed over months of working with military logistics systems. What's your recommendation, Martinez? Stone asked, echoing the question Hayes had posed during the middle of the night crisis. The Arizona facility, Senior Chief. It meets our training requirements, maintains our timeline, and I've already established preliminary coordination with their operations center. The main challenge is recoordinating transportation and accommodation arrangements on short notice, but I believe I can execute the changes without compromising mission objectives. Hayes and Stone exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't interpret, then Hayes nodded. Do it. You have full authorization to make whatever arrangements are necessary. Rodriguez will assist with technical coordination, and Stone will handle any command-level obstacles you encounter. Over the next 6 hours, Sarah orchestrated what amounted to a complete replanning of the exercise's final phase. She canceled previous arrangements, established new transportation and accommodation protocols, coordinated with facility staff at the Arizona location, and ensured that all personnel received updated movement instructions and schedule changes. The operation required her to make dozens of phone calls, coordinate with agencies across multiple states, and manage a budget that expanded significantly due to the last-minute changes. But, when the team arrived in Arizona exactly on schedule, with all equipment and personnel accounted for, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment that surpassed anything she had experienced in her civilian career. The final phase of the exercise proceeded flawlessly, with training objectives met and all personnel and equipment returned to base on schedule. But, for Sarah, the real victory was the recognition she saw in the eyes of team members who had witnessed her handling complex problems under pressure with competence and determination. On the flight back to California, Rodriguez settled into the seat next to her and said quietly, "You know, Martinez, when you first arrived, some of us wondered if a civilian could really understand what we needed from administrative support. I think you've answered that question pretty definitively." Sarah looked out the aircraft window at the landscape passing below, thinking about the journey that had brought her from a small town in Ohio to coordinating complex military operations. "I'm still learning, Rodriguez. Every day I understand more about how much I don't know. That's what makes you effective. You don't pretend to know more than you do, but you're not intimidated by problems you haven't seen before. That's exactly what we need from someone in your position." As the aircraft descended toward Naval Base Coronado, Sarah reflected on the transformation she had undergone over the past months. She had started as an outsider trying to prove she belonged in a world she didn't understand. Now she was beginning to feel like a valued member of a team that depended on her expertise and judgment. But she also sensed that the real tests of her abilities were still ahead, and that earning the complete trust and respect of SEAL Team 7 would require more than just successful logistics coordination. It would require proving that she could handle whatever challenges military service might present, including challenges she couldn't anticipate or prepare for in advance. 6 months after the successful training exercise, Sarah had settled into a rhythm of competence and confidence that she never could have imagined during her first nervous days at Naval Base Coronado. The administrative office that had once felt foreign and overwhelming now felt like home, and the complex requirements of supporting an elite military unit had become as familiar as breathing. She had handled 3 more major exercises, coordinated countless training evolutions, and developed relationships throughout the Navy logistics community that made her job significantly easier. But, on this crisp October morning, as Sarah reviewed intelligence reports that would soon change everything, she had no idea that her most significant test was approaching. The report spoke of emerging threats in a region she had never heard of, operational requirements that would strain the team's resources, and deployment timelines that would challenge every skill she had developed. Hayes entered her office at precisely 8 o'clock, carrying a folder marked with classification stamps that immediately told Sarah this was not a routine meeting. His expression was more serious than usual, and she noticed the subtle signs of stress that she had learned to recognize in military personnel facing complex operational challenges. "Martinez, I need to discuss a developing situation that's going to require your immediate attention and complete discretion." Sarah saved her work and gave him her full attention, recognizing the tone that indicated classified operational planning was about to begin. SEAL Team 7 has been tasked with a deployment that presents unique logistical challenges. The destination is a forward operating base in a region where infrastructure is limited, security requirements are extremely high, and resupply opportunities are minimal. We're looking at a 90-day deployment with personnel and equipment requirements that exceed anything we've handled before. He opened the folder and spread several documents across her desk, each one marked with classification levels that reminded Sarah of the responsibility and trust that had been placed in her. Maps showed remote locations with few roads and minimal facilities, equipment lists ran for dozens of pages, and timeline requirements seemed almost impossible to achieve. The advance team deploys in 3 weeks. Primary deployment follows 1 week later. We'll be operating from a location that requires everything to be planned, packed, and shipped with precision, because there won't be opportunities to correct mistakes or obtain items we've forgotten. Sarah studied the documents, her mind immediately beginning to process the complexity of what would be required. This wasn't like the training exercises she had coordinated, where problems could be solved with phone calls to familiar contacts and backup options were readily available. This was operational deployment to a location where mistakes could have consequences far beyond missed deadlines or scheduling conflicts. "Sir, what's the scope of my responsibility for this deployment?" "Everything related to personnel movement, equipment packaging and shipping, pre-deployment coordination, and maintaining logistics support throughout the deployment. You'll be working directly with multiple government agencies, civilian contractors, and international partners I can't tell you about yet. You'll also be serving as the primary communications link between the deployed team and higher headquarters for logistics matters." The magnitude of the responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah had dreamed of being trusted with operational support that directly impacted mission success, but the reality of that responsibility was more daunting than her imagination had anticipated. What kind of support will be available if problems arise during deployment? Hayes's expression grew even more serious. "Limited. Once the team is deployed, you'll be their primary lifeline for logistics support. Supply requests, equipment problems, personnel issues, medical logistics, emergency resupply, and coordination with extraction assets if required. You'll be making decisions in real time that affect the safety and mission success of 12 operators in a hostile environment." Over the next 2 hours, Hayes briefed her on operational requirements that stretched her understanding of military logistics to its limits. Specialized equipment that required temperature-controlled shipping, weapons and ammunition that involved complex international transportation protocols, communications gear that needed to meet security standards she had never encountered, and medical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death for team members operating far from conventional medical support. The personnel requirements were equally complex. Each team member needed specific documentation for international travel, medical certifications that required coordination with multiple agencies, and equipment configurations that had to be precisely matched to individual requirements and mission parameters. The margin for error was essentially zero, because correcting mistakes after deployment would involve international shipping, security protocols, and timeline delays that could compromise operational objectives. When Hayes left her office, Sarah stared at the documents spread across her desk and felt the familiar combination of excitement and anxiety that accompanied major challenges. This was exactly the kind of responsibility she had sought when she applied for her position, but the stakes were higher than anything she had prepared for. The team members she had come to know and respect would be depending on her planning and execution in ways that could affect their safety and mission success. She spent the rest of the day beginning the detailed planning that would consume every waking hour for the next 3 weeks. Contact lists for agencies she had never worked with, research into international shipping regulations she had never encountered, and coordination with civilian contractors who specialized in supporting military operations in remote locations. As the days passed, Sarah found herself working longer hours and dealing with more complex problems than even the most challenging training exercises had presented. International shipping of specialized equipment required navigation of customs regulations that seemed designed to prevent exactly the kind of rapid deployment the mission required. Personnel documentation involved coordination with agencies that had different priorities and timelines than military operations. Medical logistics required understanding of climate-specific health requirements and emergency evacuation procedures that could save lives in crisis situations. The work was exhausting, demanding, and occasionally frustrating, but Sarah discovered that she thrived under the pressure of knowing that her efforts directly supported operational success. Every detail she managed correctly, every problem she solved proactively, and every contingency she planned for could contribute to mission accomplishment and personnel safety. 2 weeks into the planning process, Sarah encountered a problem that threatened to derail the entire deployment timeline. The specialized communications equipment required for secure coordination with headquarters was delayed by manufacturing problems that wouldn't be resolved until after the team's scheduled departure date. Without the communications gear, the mission couldn't proceed, but delaying deployment would conflict with operational windows that had been coordinated at the highest levels of government. Sarah spent an entire night researching alternative solutions, calling contacts throughout the defense industry, and coordinating with procurement specialists who understood the technical requirements better than she did. By dawn, she had identified a potential solution involving equipment borrowed from another unit, but implementing it would require approval from multiple commands and coordination that needed to be completed within 48 hours. She presented her solution to Hayes that morning, explaining the technical compromises involved, the coordination requirements, and the risks associated with using equipment that didn't exactly match the team's training and configuration standards. "It's not optimal, sir, but it meets the essential requirements and maintains our deployment timeline. The main risk is that the team members will need additional training on equipment they're not completely familiar with, but I've arranged for technical support personnel to provide familiarization training during the pre-deployment phase." Hayes studied her proposal, asking detailed questions about equipment compatibility, training requirements, and backup options if the borrowed equipment failed during deployment. Sarah found herself defending technical specifications she had learned overnight, drawing on conversations with subject matter experts she had never met before, and presenting risk assessments that balanced operational requirements against equipment limitations. Approved. Coordinate the equipment transfer and training requirements. And, Martinez, good work identifying a solution that maintains our timeline while meeting operational requirements. The final week before deployment was a blur of last-minute coordination, equipment checks, personnel briefings, and problem-solving that tested every skill Sarah had developed over her months with SEAL Team 7. She found herself troubleshooting problems she had never encountered, coordinating with agencies she had never worked with, and making decisions that had immediate impact on operational readiness. But, as the team prepared for departure, Sarah felt a quiet confidence that she had done everything possible to ensure their success. Every piece of equipment had been checked and double-checked, every coordination requirement had been met, and every contingency she could anticipate had been planned for. The team members would deploy with everything they needed to accomplish their mission and return safely. The night before deployment, Rodriguez stopped by her office as she completed final documentation and communication checks. "Martinez, I wanted to thank you for the work you've put into this deployment. The level of detail and preparation you've managed is exceptional, and it gives all of us confidence that we'll have the support we need while we're downrange." Sarah looked up from her checklist, feeling the emotional weight of sending people she cared about into harm's way. Just doing my job, Rodriguez. Bring everyone home safely. That's the plan. And having logistics support we can count on makes that plan a lot more achievable. As the team departed the next morning, Sarah watched the aircraft disappear into the dawn sky and realized that her role had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just the administrative assistant who handled paperwork and scheduling. She had become an integral part of the team's operational capability, someone whose competence and judgment directly affected mission success and personnel safety. Over the following weeks, as she provided logistics support to the deployed team through satellite communications and coordination with multiple agencies, Sarah discovered that her transformation was complete. She had become exactly what Hayes had hoped for when he hired a civilian with fresh perspectives, someone who could enhance military operations through innovation, dedication, and a willingness to find solutions to problems that had no standard answers. But she also realized that earning the trust and respect of SEAL Team 7 had been only the beginning of her journey. The real test would come when she had to prove that trust was deserved, not just in training exercises and deployment planning, but in the life-or-death situations that define military service at its highest levels. 3 weeks into the deployment, at 2:17 in the morning California time, Sarah's secure satellite phone rang with the kind of urgency that instantly erased the boundary between sleep and complete alertness. She had been maintaining irregular sleep schedules to stay available for communications from the deployed team, and her apartment had been transformed into a logistics command center with multiple communication systems, reference materials, and emergency contact information readily accessible. Martinez, this is Stone. We have a situation that requires immediate logistics support. The tension in Senior Chief Stone's voice, transmitted through encrypted satellite communications from halfway around the world, told Sarah that this was not a routine request. In 3 weeks of deployment communications, she had never heard Stone sound anything other than completely calm and controlled. Go ahead, Senior Chief. I'm ready to copy. We need emergency medical evacuation for one of our personnel. Rodriguez took shrapnel from an IED during a reconnaissance operation. He's stable but needs surgical intervention that's not available at our current location. We need medevac coordination with a facility that can handle his injuries and security clearance for the receiving medical facility. Sarah felt her heart stop for a moment as the implications hit her. This wasn't a logistics exercise or a training problem with multiple solutions and time to research alternatives. This was a real emergency involving someone she had worked with daily for months, someone whose life might depend on her ability to coordinate complex medical evacuation procedures she had studied but never implemented. Senior Chief, what's Rodriguez's current medical status and what are the constraints for evacuation? Conscious and alert, but he's lost significant blood. Our medic has stabilized him, but he needs surgical intervention within 12 hours. We can move him to an evacuation point approximately 40 kilometers from our current position, but the evacuation aircraft needs to be capable of medical support during transport and the receiving facility needs to have surgical capability and security clearance for classified personnel. Sarah was already reaching for the emergency medical evacuation procedure she had hoped never to use, her mind racing through the coordination requirements that would be needed to save Rodriguez's life. Medical evacuation from a forward operating area required coordination with military medical facilities, transportation assets capable of life support during evacuation, and security protocols that could protect classified personnel and mission information. Senior Chief, I need to coordinate with multiple agencies to arrange evacuation. Can you give me a timeline for when the team needs to be at the evacuation point? We can have Rodriguez at the evacuation point in 4 hours. After that, we're operating in daylight with increased security risks for all personnel. 4 hours to arrange medical evacuation from a remote location to a suitable medical facility, involving aircraft coordination, medical personnel staging, security clearances, and international coordination that could involve agencies Sarah had never worked with before. The complexity was staggering, but failure meant that Rodriguez might die from injuries sustained while serving his country. After confirming additional details about Rodriguez's condition and the team's location, Sarah began the most intensive coordination effort of her career. Her first call was to the Navy Medical Command Emergency Coordination Center, where she explained the situation and began the process of identifying suitable medical facilities and transportation assets. The challenges became apparent immediately. The nearest military medical facility with surgical capability was 800 miles from the team's location, requiring long-range medical evacuation aircraft that might not be immediately available. civilian medical facilities closer to the team's location could provide adequate surgical care, but involved security complications related to treating classified personnel with injuries sustained during operational missions. For the next 3 hours, Sarah coordinated with a dozen different agencies and commands, each with their own procedures, priorities, and constraints. She arranged for a Navy medical evacuation aircraft to be staged at an intermediate location, coordinated with a military medical facility to receive Rodriguez and provide the surgical care he needed, and established communication protocols that would allow the deployed team to coordinate their movement to the evacuation point. But 90 minutes before the evacuation was scheduled to occur, Sarah received a call that threatened to destroy all her careful coordination. "Ms. Martinez, this is Colonel Jackson at the Medical Evacuation Command Center. We have a problem with the aircraft you requested. Mechanical issues have grounded our primary evacuation aircraft, and our backup aircraft doesn't have the range to reach your team's location and return to a medical facility without refueling." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest, but forced herself to think systematically about alternatives. Rodriguez's life depended on her ability to find a solution that didn't exist in any manual or procedure she had studied. "Colonel, what are my options for alternative evacuation? We have a Coast Guard helicopter that could reach your team's location, but it doesn't have the medical equipment for long-range patient transport. Or we could coordinate with civilian medical evacuation services, but that involves security complications and timeline delays that might not meet your medical requirements." Sarah realized that saving Rodriguez's life would require creative coordination that went beyond standard military procedures. She needed to combine resources from multiple services in a way that met medical requirements, maintained security protocols, and could be implemented within the timeline constraints imposed by his injuries. "Colonel, what if we coordinate a two-stage evacuation? Coast Guard helicopter to extract Rodriguez from the forward location to an intermediate point where he can be transferred to a military medical aircraft capable of long-range transport to definitive surgical care?" The proposal involved coordination between services that rarely work together, medical transfers that would require precise timing and location coordination, and security protocols that would need to be established in real time. But it was the only solution Sarah could identify that addressed all the constraints simultaneously. "That could work, Ms. Martinez, but you'd need to coordinate the intermediate transfer point, ensure medical continuity between aircraft, and establish security protocols for Coast Guard personnel who aren't cleared for information about your team's mission." Over the next hour, Sarah orchestrated what amounted to a real-time miracle of interagency coordination. She arranged for a Coast Guard medical helicopter to extract Rodriguez from the team's evacuation point, coordinated a secure intermediate location where he could be transferred to a Navy medical aircraft, and established medical protocols that would ensure continuity of care throughout the evacuation process. The coordination required her to work simultaneously with Coast Guard operations centers, Navy medical commands, Air Force logistics coordinators, and civilian medical facilities, each conversation involving technical details she had never encountered and security requirements that had to be balanced against medical urgency. When Stone called to confirm that Rodriguez had been successfully extracted and was en route to surgical care, Sarah felt a combination of relief and exhaustion that left her emotionally drained but professionally satisfied. "Outstanding work, Martinez. Rodriguez is stable and en route to definitive medical care because of your coordination. The entire team understands that you probably saved his life today." 3 days later, Sarah received a call from Rodriguez himself, speaking from his hospital bed at the military medical facility where he was recovering from surgery that had successfully repaired his injuries. "Martinez, I wanted to call and thank you personally for what you did. The doctors tell me that the speed of my evacuation and the coordination of medical care during transport probably made the difference between a full recovery and permanent disability." Sarah found herself struggling with emotions she hadn't expected. "I'm just glad you're going to be okay, Rodriguez. How are you feeling?" "Sore, but grateful. And I wanted to tell you something else. The whole team has been talking about how you handled the evacuation coordination. Stone says it was the most effective logistics support he's seen in 20 years of military service, and Hayes is recommending you for recognition that goes far beyond what civilian support personnel normally receive." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her apartment thinking about the journey that had brought her from a small town in Ohio to coordinating life-saving medical evacuations for elite military personnel. She had started as an outsider trying to prove she belonged in a world she didn't understand, and had become someone whose skills and judgment were trusted with responsibilities that could mean the difference between life and death. But the real transformation, she realized, wasn't in her professional capabilities or her understanding of military procedures. It was in her understanding of what it meant to serve something larger than herself, to be part of a team whose mission was protecting others, and to accept responsibility that extended far beyond personal advancement or recognition. A week later, Sarah was working late in her office when Hayes appeared in her doorway, carrying an official document that she immediately recognized as orders or commendation paperwork. "Martinez, I want to discuss your future with SEAL Team 7. She looked up from her computer, unsure of what to expect. "Yes, sir?" "Your performance over the past months, and particularly your handling of Rodriguez's medical evacuation, has been exceptional. You've demonstrated capabilities that go far beyond administrative support, and you've earned the complete trust and respect of every team member." Hayes sat down across from her desk, his expression more serious than usual. "I'm recommending you for a position that doesn't officially exist yet, but should. Senior Logistics Coordinator for Special Operations Teams, with responsibilities that include operational planning, deployment coordination, and crisis management for multiple teams conducting classified missions." The proposal was simultaneously everything she had hoped for and more responsibility than she had ever imagined accepting. She thought about the other team members, whose safety and mission success would continue to depend on logistics support that she would provide. And she thought about the girl from Ohio who had wanted to serve her country and had discovered that service meant becoming part of something larger and more important than she had ever imagined possible. As she drove home, Sarah realized that her transformation was complete not because she had mastered military procedures or earned the respect of elite personnel, but because she had discovered that true service meant accepting responsibility for the welfare and success of others, regardless of personal cost or recognition. The next morning, when she arrived at work to begin her new responsibilities, she found a note on her desk from Senior Chief Stone: "Welcome to the team, Martinez. We're proud to serve alongside you." Sarah Martinez, the quiet girl who had once believed she was too soft for the real world, had become exactly what the military needed: someone whose dedication, competence, and innovation enhanced the capabilities of America's finest warriors. She had earned her place not through military training or combat experience, but through the kind of service that proved civilians could contribute to military excellence when they possessed the courage to accept responsibility for something greater than themselves.